In this year's edition of the Global News Relay, How COVID Changed Us, coming up we take a look at the ways the pandemic has affected our community, including how many people are still finding ways to cope in a world much different than it was a year ago.
Businesses around the United States first struggled and then found a way to survive in a world without in-person interaction. But some places were hit harder than others. Find out how some local eateries adapted while others disappeared.
And there's few things that have changed more in our day-to-day lives than how we communicate with each other. But will those changes in interaction help us or harm us as we slowly return to normalcy? Students and an expert weigh in with their thoughts on the present and the future of communication in our new world. Welcome to the 2021 Global News Relay edition of MCTV. I'm Nick Tauschek.
And I'm Krizia Williams.
We're coming to you from the College of Media and Communication at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas, here in the United States. Lubbock is one of the cities hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic here in the U.S. Lubbock County has recorded nearly 50,000 cases of the coronavirus since the first infections in the city were announced last March. Lubbock ranks among the top 10 cities in America for most cases of COVID-19 per capita, and the city has also reported more than 700 deaths, which is a lot for a population of only 300,000 people. But since the beginning of the year, we've seen a positive change here in the city, as the number of new cases per day has dropped by more than 90% since January 1st. The number of deaths has also decreased, and our hospitals have returned to near normal capacities after running out of beds multiple times in the winter. And the biggest reason for that change has been the introduction of the COVID-19 vaccine. Lubbock residents first began having access to the vaccine in January, and since then, close to 25% of the population has been fully vaccinated. That puts Lubbock ahead of the national vaccination rate, with just over 20% of Americans being reported as fully vaccinated.
Even though the pandemic situation has improved dramatically here in West Texas, COVID-19 is still having an effect on Lubbock residents. The virus has taken a toll on many people in many different ways. College students' mental health in particular has become a major talking point in light of the pandemic. Resources like the Texas Tech Student Wellness Center have been doing all they can to help. Dr. Richard Lennox is the director of the Texas Tech Student Counseling Center. He said he and his staff have seen a shift in student mental health due to the changes in student social interaction and the unknown of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The main issue that we have noticed, and I'm hearing from my staff, is the social isolation that is having an impact on the students, and it's happening in a couple of different ways. Students that might have had some previous mental health issues, it seems like the isolation, the social isolation, not being able to be around their friends as much. For those students, it has been exacerbating their symptoms. A lot of students that come into the counseling center are dealing with anxiety or depression. Those are the two main issues that bring students into the counseling center. So if they were struggling with those issues before COVID, it seems like the social isolation has just made those symptoms worse for a lot of folks. And then we also see some students coming in that maybe did not have any previous history of mental health issues, but the social isolation, the uncertainty is another big issue that is causing issues for people. Just not knowing what is going to be happening in the future. When are things going to return to normal? For some people, that has increased anxiety.
Daphne De La Fuente, the student assistant and peer educator president at the Risk Intervention and Safety Education Office, said she has noticed how college students' mental health has become more noticeable and encourages students to speak up when they are in need.
I think being honest about what you're feeling at all times. I think we have a really big tendency, even if it isn't like super, super major, in comparison to maybe like some of your friends may be experiencing, any sort of like feeling that you maybe aren't really like sitting well with or are uncomfortable with. Like, it's okay to say that you're not feeling good. You shouldn't really like lie to any of your friends or your family or people close to you and saying like, oh, I'm okay, like I've got this. It's always important to be honest about your feelings to the people who can help you, because that's the one way that help is going to get to you, and the resources to get to you is by speaking up about where you're at and how you're feeling.
Alongside De La Fuente, Lennox said he urges students to seek the help that they need and do what they can to keep their stress as low as possible.
It's really keeping stress, and this is true for all mental health issues, it's really about keeping stress down low enough so it doesn't back up into becoming a mental health issue. So keeping stress low, making sure you're practicing your self-care strategies every day. I talk with folks, and this is true for everybody, professionals as well. We always think, I'll take care of my self-care later. I'll do it tomorrow when I have time. And that is not a great strategy for self-care. It really is better to carve out time on a daily basis, even if you don't feel overwhelmed. Take the time to engage in some self-care because you want to prevent getting to that point where you feel overwhelmed. And if you can keep your stress low enough by engaging in some of those proactive self-care strategies, then you never have to get overwhelmed during your busy week.
Mental health is a concern, especially when it comes to students and the busy lives they live. With the world ever changing due to the pandemic, times can be hard. If you ever feel like you need help or you're feeling down mentally or emotionally, Dr. Lennox recommends finding a resource like the Counseling Center for assistance.
One source of stress that has affected students and many people around the world has been changes in how people interact and learn new skills. During COVID-19, learning has changed tremendously, with many forms of instruction transitioning to virtual options. With those changes, many college students are concerned about getting the right education they need to succeed in their careers. Toni Krebs, Assistant Director of Employer Relations at Texas Tech, says she interacts with students who feel like they aren't getting the same quality of education as in years past.
Seems a little like artificial intelligence to some people. Okay, so you're not there, you're not able to, facial expressions can be a little bit lost in there. Congruence between a facial expression and what is said, so body language and what is said can be, the timing can be off because there's sometimes a delay. So I think maybe that might be part of why they feel it's almost like a false created type of atmosphere.
Even with the differences in communication, Krebs says it's still possible for students to get a good education that can help them in their future careers.
Also going to have to take those initiatives to reach out more, for internships, for jobs. They're going to have to work hard. We've tried to tell students for years and years that you don't just sit back and all good things happen for you. It takes work.
Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, many businesses have been hit hard by lockdowns and restrictions that keep people from being able to spend money in person. But as cities around the United States began to open up, owners began to discover new options to offer goods and services to their local communities. And here in Texas, with businesses now being able to open to pre-COVID capacity, MCTV's Anakin Rayos decided to stop by and see how one group of business owners found a way to survive.
It's no secret that everyone around the globe has had a dramatic change in life and work style thanks to COVID-19. And some of the ones who went through the most drastic changes are none other than local restaurants, especially here in Lubbock, like J&B's Coffee, Spanky's, and Flip's Tavern, to name a few. Some changes these restaurants made to combat COVID-19 range from including new cleaning routines to reduce number of guests within the restaurant to even staff cutbacks as well.
We had changes every single week, from putting hand sanitizer absolutely everywhere in the store to buying antiviral spray to limiting capacity, and then everything got shut down, and we basically turned into a Sonic type operation. So our lobby was closed, everyone wore masks, and we operated curbside for a long time.
We had a crew of like 18 front of house people and about 12 in the back of house, and during that time it was we went down to maybe 5 or 6 front of house, and about the same for the back of house.
When it first started, we were one of the first places to start enforcing CDC guidelines, masking, social distancing. We dropped down to 50% like immediately, just to stay as safe as possible and keep our staff as safe as possible.
Even with all these substantial changes affecting restaurants, they always made it their goal to make sure customers were taken care of safely.
We just wanted to make sure our customers could be served in whichever way they could. So we've always, until recently, had completely limited capacity in the lobby. We did curbside for anyone that requested it, especially if you were elderly or immunocompromised.
But some restaurants found it harder to implement those changes than others.
We actually made it to the point to where we had to shut down, and we were, going to call it quits until all of this was over and we were going to be able to open properly because, nobody was allowed inside.
With the recent change in statewide guidelines, many local restaurants are asking customers to be understanding of the situation as they attempt to serve all guests.
Just be responsible and be respectful, especially of small businesses' rules that they're sticking with, whether it be masking or non-masking. Everybody's doing the best that they can in this time and doing what they think is best for them, their staff, their families, their businesses.
After all the changes COVID-19 gave us, no one knows for certain whenever we can return to a normal lifestyle. But one thing that is certain is that if we all stay safe, follow rules and regulations, we can make that normal lifestyle a possibility by working together around the globe. For MCTV News, I'm Anakin Rayos.
Anakin joins us now in the studio. Anakin, as you visited these local restaurants around town, did you feel like things were starting to seem like normal?
Well, to answer your question, Krizia, it did seem like things were seeming to go back to normal, with one exception being everyone wearing these around the restaurant.
Did the restaurants you went to see seem to still be following COVID-19 guidelines, even though masks are no longer required and there's no capacity limits?
Luckily, yes, all the restaurants I visited were following safety guidelines, and it seems like wearing a mask was more of a personal preference for people visiting the restaurant.
Thanks, Anakin.
Another area that saw major changes over the last year is the sports industry. Once the decision was made that fans could no longer attend events, sports organizations had to come up with new options to engage an online audience. Blake Silverthorne is a lead video producer in the Texas Tech Athletic Department. He says his department, like many other sports organizations around the world, had to get creative during the pandemic.
Like the rest of the world, we've had to become more virtual. So a lot of our interviewing platforms, social media, videos, and communication ways have just become virtual. We've started new podcasts. We've enhanced the way that we create video instruction for our fans, whether it be how to use mobile tickets, which is another digital addition we've added this year. But all around, we've just become more virtual. With our student athletes, as the pandemic started, everybody was virtual, and there was really no in-person communication or video shoots. As the year has gone on, we found safe ways to ease back into some of those in-person interviews, but with limited schedules and limited ability to be person to person, we have had to find other ways in doing that.
Silverthorne says that even though sports events are beginning to return to normal, some things that changed in the pandemic may stick around for years to come, including the use of remote broadcasters who do play-by-play for video broadcasts. Right now, Tech has people from around the country announce university sporting events for video broadcasts without having to leave the comfort of their own homes. The coronavirus pandemic has had wide-ranging effects on everything from healthcare to transportation and even to basics we take for granted, like sharing a smile with someone out in public. But there's little argument that the biggest change most people have experienced is how we communicate with our friends, coworkers, and even loved ones. So how will the alteration in communication affect each of us long-term? MCTV's Patricia Perry joins us now in studio with more on this story. Patricia?
Thanks, Nick. COVID-19 has changed how we communicate completely. With new forms of virtual communication for online learning and business meetings, we are either temporarily changed or forever changed. How has this new form of virtual communication affected students and professors here at Texas Tech University? How will this new skill of virtual communication be beneficial for us in the future? Virtual learning has changed how college students are learning completely. Freshman architecture major Connor Hathaway talks about the disadvantage of learning online.
It is definitely very different, and there is probably a lot more of me teaching myself. And that's probably on me too, because it's much harder to get motivated to go to class or to remember class or to pay attention to class when it's on the screen, because you're not really there, but you're still in your room, so it feels like a completely different place.
Online learning does give students the liberty to complete work and class when they can, but it does cut out some social aspects. Freshman Callie Harcrow gives her point of view about virtual learning.
I like it because I get my own space and time to do things, and I can do it as I go with work and other outside curriculum. But it's also hard because I don't have much interaction with face-to-face people.
This new aspect of virtual learning is benefiting students in a way they may not see yet. Associate Dean for Undergraduate Affairs Todd Chambers shares how this new form of communication can help students in the future.
I'm really excited about what the future holds. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities. We've already seen industries and organizations and specific companies that are already looking for experts and communication specialists who know how to run a virtual meeting, who know how to everybody now is looking for experts and expertise in all types of social media platforms.
Although virtual communication has been hard for everyone to adapt to, COVID-19 pushed us to develop these new skills that will be beneficial in years to come. Many are hoping to go back to a complete face-to-face format, but we may be changed forever. For MCTV, I'm Patricia Perry.
Patricia, in your interaction with students, did it seem like many of them thought that the changes in communication could actually be a good thing for their future careers?
Well, Nick, the students that I talked to felt like it would be beneficial to have this virtual communication skill, but they are worried if they're getting a good enough education to fulfill the requirements for their career in the future.
In your own personal experience, what's been the hardest part of virtual or hybrid classes?
Well, if I'm going to be honest, it's paying attention. I find it way easier to log on to Zoom and not really pay attention to the lecture or listen to an audio lecture and halfway listen. So I feel like it's a lot harder to get stuff done and do your assignments on time.
Thanks, Patricia.
So Nick, the theme of this year's Global News Relay broadcast is how COVID changed us. Let me ask you this question. How has COVID changed you?
Recently, I've seen that a lot of businesses have sent their employees home to work remotely. So it begs the question, what other opportunities for those of us graduating and going into the workforce are going to be open to us when we do emerge from all of our studies? I'm just very excited for all the opportunities for us. What about you?
For sure, I'm definitely excited to have that experience under my belt as I graduate this May. But Zoom fatigue is a thing, so definitely take care of that mental health if you can. That's what I've learned.
That's all for our portion of the Global News Relay.
Thanks so much for joining us, and we wish everyone around the world health and happiness as we slowly return to normal.